Hello everyone and welcome to NLP and the Coronavirus Day 16. I hope you're all staying well and being well. So yesterday I was covered the concept in NLP of anchoring and how we could manage in this time of lockdown and isolation, etc. We could manage naturally occurring negative anchors. You know, when people are in a unwanted state, negative state, and they're looking at us, they're hearing the sound of our voice, maybe we're hugging them, etc. That's going to create a negative anchor, as I mentioned yesterday. Nothing we can do about that, and it might be just at that particular point in time that's what that person or the child needed at that point in time. But then, about how we could then go about cancelling or collapsing those negative anchors. And I got quite a lot of feedback, both in comments and personal messages, that was really useful for a number of people, and particularly a number of messages and comments from parents who are locked down with their kids and their children at the moment. Their kids and children are obviously not always in a totally positive state. And therefore, that people recognize that they could have been creating negative anchors, and what we've been looking at is how we can go about collapsing those. So following on from that, I just wanted to talk about something again this evening related, which is, again, it's more of an educational video rather than an awareness video, rather than giving you a specific technique. I'm going to give you a specific technique to collapse any negative anchors that you think you may have created. But I wanted to talk about something else before we do that technique, because we use that technique on two different things. So here's the thing I want to talk about tonight. When people are in a heightened, intense emotional state, particularly if it's an intense negative emotional state, which, for obvious reasons, many people are experiencing those kind of things at the moment, then that person is in a hyper-suggestible state. So a intense negative emotion, or traumatic state, if you like, is as effective as medium to deep trance for installing suggestions into that person's unconscious mind. So this is just something that we need to be aware of, as well as the anchoring side of things, but also being aware of the words that we use with someone if and when they're in a state like that, to make sure that we're not inadvertently installing a disempowering suggestion, which could go about actually installing a limiting belief. In Huna, one of the Kumus in our lineage, John Kahimikawa, had a saying. He said, in the word there is life, and in the word there is death. And in my new presuppositions of NLP 2.0, which I covered last year, was that words carry energy and words carry power to create change, either for the positive or for the not positive. And I think we've all experienced the kind of like highly destructive power of somebody saying just the wrong thing in the wrong way to the wrong person at the wrong time. I think all of us have experienced that, either first-hand or second-hand. But equally, the flip side of that coin must be true too, in that, therefore there is a massive positive transformative power of saying just the right thing in the right way to the right person at the right time. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight briefly. So there's a number of concepts, if you like, within NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which I want to talk to you specifically around the linguistic thing, which is what we carry inside of us all the time when somebody's communicating with us is what we call at NLP an internal representation. So when we communicate with somebody, what we're doing is we are changing the pictures they're seeing in their mind, we're changing the sounds they're hearing in their mind, we're changing the way that they feel, and we're changing their internal dialogue, or what we call in NLP, their auditory digital, which is our self-talk. So you cannot not change somebody else's internal representations, because every time that you talk to somebody, they have to change their internal representations to make sense out of what you're saying in their own unique model of the world. So as I'm communicating with you right now, one thing I know is that you are continually changing your internal representations. You're making pictures, you're hearing sounds, your emotional state is changing, and what you're saying to yourself is changing in order for you to make sense out of what I'm saying to you via this video, via this live video. So it's not that from an NLP point of view we need to learn how to change people's internal representations, because we've been doing it ever since we've been speaking. What we want to learn from an NLP point of view is how to create positive internal representations as opposed to negative internal representations. So we want to create internal representations that empower the person, enable them to do more, to be more, and have more, rather than the opposite of being less, having less, and doing less. So then, once we get that concept, then the next thing around that is that the human mind cannot represent a negative directly in consciousness. So if I say to you, don't think of a blue tree, what are you thinking about? Thinking about a blue tree, right? Because you've got to think about what you're not meant to be thinking about in order to know what you're meant to be thinking about. Think about that for a second. Yeah. So we are always creating internal representations. The question is, are they useful internal representations or not useful internal representations? So a couple of general things there. One is that quite often, and I think this is actually installed maybe from our childhood, from our educational system, maybe from the media, in that what a lot of the media and what a lot of the education, what a lot of training actually has us do is they inform us what we're not meant to be thinking about and what we're not meant to be doing. For instance, you see your kids out in the garden and they're about to do something which isn't going to be safe, for instance, and you yell at them, don't do X. Which, of course, because they don't think of a blue tree, now they have to think about doing X in order to know that they're not meant to be doing X, which dramatically increases the probability of them doing X. In fact, they might not have even thought about doing X before you actually put that suggestion into their mind. And, there was a study done in the US as to the biggest contributor to industrial accidents. It was actually demonstrated to be one of those yellow signs, where there's a guy there and there's a banana peel and he's slipping backwards and the sign says, don't slip. Well, what do you have to think about to know to not slip? You have to think about slipping. And the way that your neurology works is that it's designed to lead you towards what it is you're focusing on. And there's a couple of incidences of this. I don't know if any of you've ever been on an advanced driving course. But quite often on an advanced driving course, what they do is they put you on a skid pan. Now, a skid pan is this large area of concrete, or tarmac, and what they do is they spray water onto that. And you've got a specially equipped car, and the specially equipped car, when the driving instructor presses a button, the car will go into a skid. So technically now, that car is out of control. Yeah. But what happens is, and this is part of the advanced driving training, is that naturally what a lot of people do when the car goes out of control is they look around everywhere to find something that they don't want to crash into. And as soon as they focus on that tree or that wall, for instance, then what happens is this out of control car actually skids towards the tree or the wall. So what the advanced driving instructor does is they actually retrain the driver's mind. So they scan around when the car goes out of control and they find where they want the car to go. So literally, if there was two trees and the driver focuses on that point between the two trees, this technically out of control car will skid between the two trees, because our neurology is designed to bring to us what it is that we're paying attention to. Now, I was working with one of my private clients, one of my breakthrough clients. I think it was last year or the year before, and he's a helicopter pilot. And he said, you have the same thing when you have helicopter training, in that a helicopter is technically permanently out of control. In the old days, before fly-by-wire, what the pilot would have to do with the joystick is they would do this thing which they called stirring the pudding, where they would continually move the joystick so that the helicopter was permanently out of balance, unstable, but would stay in place. Whereas if you held the joystick in one place, the helicopter would actually fall out of the sky. But equally, because this helicopter is permanently unstable, or like a car, is actually in a skid, the thing that you are trained to do as a helicopter pilot is continually focus on where you want the helicopter to go. Never where you don't want the helicopter to go, because I don't think of a blue tree. So what you do is, if there's two buildings and you will fly between the two buildings, you pay attention to the space or the gap between, never to the building. So and everybody's neurology, everybody's nervous system is like that. So the key thing with these things is, first thing to remember is when someone, whether it be an adult, whether it be a child, is in an intense emotional state, particularly a negative state, then they are hypersuggestible. I'll explain what that means in a moment. But also that when we're communicating with them in those kind of situations, we'd want to make sure that we communicated to create positive internal representations. So we want to communicate with them in a way where we're creating internal representations of what we want them to do rather than what we don't want them to do. How we want them to feel rather than how we don't want them to feel. Yeah, that's the first thing. Now, by heightened suggestion is that, as I mentioned before, medium to deep trance, heightened suggestibility, and the deeper in trance somebody is, the more suggestible they are. And trauma, emotional trauma, is as effective as medium to deep trance for suggestion, as is also intense negative emotions, even if it's not traumatic. So not only do we want to be careful about the way that we phrase the words to the person, so that we have them focus on where we want them to go rather than where we don't want them to go, then also we want to make sure that the suggestions that we're giving them, even if they weren't negated, were actually empowering suggestions. So here's an example of this. I was working with another private client of mine doing a breakthrough session. And when I do a breakthrough session, what I'm looking for is what I would call a linchpin limiting belief. A linchpin, from an engineering point of view, a linchpin is a pin that holds the entire mechanical structure together. So that if you can find the linchpin limiting belief, that really gives you the clue as to how somebody is creating all the things in their life that they don't want. And a linchpin limiting decision would normally be at the level of identity. So it'd be a belief that starts with I am, and then whatever follows it isn't useful, isn't empowering. So, one that I worked on a long time ago when I first learned NLP in 1993, and I'll share this with you, is a limiting belief of I'm not good enough. Now, if you think about it, what areas of my life would be adversely affected by a limiting belief of I'm not good enough? Well, every area, right? Because the one thing that every single area of our life has in common, whether it be education, whether it be relationships, whether it be health and fitness, whether it be finance, whether it be career, business, etc., all of those areas of life have one thing in common: me, right? So imagine I'm sitting there with my unconscious mind, I'm not good enough running, then am I going to find pretty much every single area of my life a bit of a struggle? Yeah. And that's certainly the way that I experienced things before I did my practitioner training way back in 1993. Identifying that limiting belief and getting rid of it was so personally transformative for me that it was one of the things that had me go, right, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to enable as many people as possible to learn these things so they can get the same kind of results as me. So I'm working with this guy, and we're working on identifying his linchpin limiting belief or limiting decision, depending on whether we're doing timeline therapy or NLP or mental emotional release. And this is what he told me. He said, "I'm not a good person." Now, if you think about it, what I always do when a belief comes up like that from a client or from me, I'm going, okay, is that a useful belief? Is that a belief that will enable me to be who I want to be, do what I want to do, and have what I want to have? I'm going, if I had a belief that I wasn't a good person, would that be a problem? And, you don't need to do any mind reading. You know that if you got a belief like that, it wouldn't be useful. And previously, I would have left it at that, But when I was working with this particular client, I went, no, he's telling me what he's not, but he's not telling me who he is or what he is. So I asked the question of him, and I said, okay, so ask your unconscious mind, who or what are you that's not a good person? And he went, oh, I'm the devil. Yeah. And again, I'm going like, okay, so if you had a belief that you were the devil, how's your life going to pan out? Would that be a limiting belief? Well, of course, most people would say that'd be a limiting belief unless you actually were the devil, I suppose. So we decided that, I said, if that belief were to disappear, what would happen to your life? And he said, my life would completely change for the better. I said, how would your life improve if that belief of I'm the devil were to disappear? And his state changed immediately, and he started reeling out all the things that he'd be able to be, do, and have that he previously hadn't. And one of the things that we then do with timeline therapy and mental emotional release, because that's what I decided to use as an intervention with this client, is to find from their unconscious mind when they first made that decision, when they decided that that was true for them. And what came up from his unconscious mind was that it happened when he was 4 years old. So I took him over his timeline and went back to that first event. And not all clients are consciously aware of what's happening in the first event, but he was. And this is what was happening. And this is why this popped into my mind today as being something which I think is an important distinction, an important thing to be aware of at the moment. Is he got it was when he was 4 years old, and he went to the event, and he had just done something which any typical 4-year-old would do. Yeah. But his dad was really angry about what he'd done. So you got this little 4-year-old unconscious mind, and you got this big dad, and dad's angry. So and he's shouting, loud voice, angry facial expression. and says to my client, he goes, "You're a little devil, you." And that was the first event, the root cause of that limiting belief, which had literally lied there in my client's unconscious mind for, a significant amount of time. So obviously, what we did was we took that out with timeline therapy, and that decision, that belief disappeared. His unconscious mind reevaluated his past as if he'd never made that decision or had that belief in the first place. And literally, amongst a number of other things that we did in the breakthrough session, a number of other interventions that we did, like releasing of negative emotions like anger and sadness and fear and hurt and guilt and shame and anxiety from the past, and aligning values and then setting some really compelling goals, getting rid of that linchpin limiting belief was the real crux of the transformation. And, his dad didn't say that because he thought, it's just that we don't know the impact that our words can have on other people's unconscious minds. So I just want to leave you with that, because obviously, there are people that are in negative states at this point in time. We talked about it from changing their states and also from managing anchors last time. And this was, again, an educational one. Now, some of you went like, "Oh, I think I've become so-and-so's negative anchor," or "I think I might have installed a limiting belief," or whatever it may be, okay? So the first thing around change is awareness. So some of you became aware that you might have inadvertently created a negative anchor in a loved one, for instance. First one is awareness, right? Because if you're not aware of it, you can't change it. Yeah. So if you went like, "I think I might have inadvertently created a negative anchor in my partner, in my child, etc., good for you, great honesty, and you might be now going like, "I might have inadvertently installed a negative belief in my partner, family member, kids, etc." Great, fantastic, awareness. So then tomorrow, what our Facebook Live is going to be about tomorrow is how we can use a technique that you've already been using to collapse any negative anchors, either in yourself or in other people, and also that we can use to remove a limiting belief in yourself or other people. Yeah, so anyway, we all know how to change our state because we've been doing our peripheral vision, we've been doing our heart breathing, we've been doing our havening. So that's good. Keep doing that. There's lots happening. I know we talked at first about, stabilize, ground, and grow, and been doing stuff about grounding, been doing stuff about growing. But every now and again, you might get triggered back into stabilization again. That's okay. That's okay. It's a heightened emotional time. It's okay if you're feeling those emotions. Just remember that now you have a choice and you know what to do about them. Be aware of your language. Be aware of your own state, because quite often when we go out of state ourselves, that's when we say things afterwards that we go like, "Oh, I really wish I'd said that differently." Yeah, and we can still change it. So I'm going to teach you a technique tomorrow, a very quick technique that will enable you to collapse negative anchors and also to remove unwanted suggestions. So wherever you are in the world, love you lots, and ahui ho.